All electronic devices, including mobile phones, should be switched to silent. I would ask that any members of the public who have joined us in the room today do not interfere in the proceedings, and as soon as the hearing is closed, please leave quietly. So, for introductions, I'm Deputy Catherine Curtis, the Chair of the panel.
I'm Deputy Helen Miles, member of the panel.
Yeah, our Vice Chair, Constable Mark Labby, is on his way. He'll be here at any minute now.
Deputy Mary Lahegara, Minister for Justice and Home Affairs.
Deputy Lindsay Feltham, Minister for Social Security.
Deputy Steve Lewis, Minister for the Environment.
Rhiannon Small, Head of Service, Customs and Immigration.
Warwick Horsfall, Senior Manager, Customs and Immigration.
Okay, thank you everyone. We have 1.5 hours for this hearing, and I think all the panel really appreciates that all ministers could come along so that we can try and get a clear picture of the work permit policy. So if I start with some questions, which is about numbers first. So please can you confirm the number of work permits issued by the Jersey Customs and Immigration Service during 2024 and 2025?
Basically, in 24 temporary work permits, there was 2,432. Skilled work permit, 748. And to the end of June this year, work temporary, 1,736, and skilled, 431.
Okay, so I'm just trying to compare that to the 800% increase reported between 2019 and 2023. I'm just wondering how that compares at the moment.
I think I'll ask Rhiannon, because she's got more percentages, update to what this is.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can confirm that the difference percentage-wise between the figures for 2023 and 2024, we saw an increase of 7.5% of temporary work permits, and we saw a decrease of 2.6% of skilled work permits from 23 to 24. Yeah. The total change from 2019 to 2024, breakdown temporary work permits, we've seen an increase of 3,528%.
Right.
Percent.
Right.
So just to give you the figures for that, 2019, and this is for temporary. 2019, we issued 67 temporary work permits. 2024, we issued 2,432. Skilled work permits over the same period, we've seen an increase of 169.1%. So that's gone from 278 issued in 2019 to 748 in 2024. So I think it's useful to give you a total overall percentage increase from 2019 to 2024, and that's 821.7%.
Okay, because it was fairly low in 2019 compared to now. And I'm just trying to get it through my head. This is the last couple of years and how they compare as well.
Yeah, so I can talk you through if you want either the total figures or just temporary.
Just temporary.
Okay, so temporary 2019 we issued 67.
Yeah.
2020 132. 2021 931.
Okay.
2022 1,967. 2023 2,263. And 2024 2,432.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so can you tell us what are the current leading sectors in terms of work permit issuance? Is it still mostly hospitality or?
Just bear with me for a second. Okay, so in 25, in the last 6 months, you've got agriculture, horticultural at 321, construction at 94, fishing, aquaculture is less than 5, hospitality 1,320, and skilled 427.
So where does the care sector come into that one?
Skilled.
They're skilled.
That's all in skilled, is it? Okay. Right. Okay. So has there been much change over the last few years in the sectors?
Do you want me to talk
Yeah,
through that? Yeah, I'm
I think
happy
that might be easier over.
I can give you the figures and all the percentages.
Just an idea, I think, at the moment.
Okay.
Fine.
In that case, bear with me, apologies. We are seeing an increase year on year, obviously taking 2025 out because we've only got partial data for 2025. We're seeing an increase year on year, so I'll just give you the 2020 figures for agriculture and horticulture. 2020, we issued 55. 2024, it's up to 511.
Right,
Construction, we didn't issue any work permits in 2020.
yeah.
2024, we've issued 162. Fishing and aquaculture, less than 5 in 2020, and it's gone to 18 in 2024. Hospitality in 2020, we issued 74. 2024, we've issued 1,741. So that's the biggest jump.
Yeah, I see that. And in 2019, was there anything in skilled?
I haven't got the 2019 figures in front of
okay.
me, but I can get those to you.
It wasn't much compared to now, I suppose.
2019 temporary work permits was 67, skilled work permits were 278.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, so that's interesting. So are there emerging industries now relying more heavily on work permit holders as well?
I think from the data we've got in front of us, it's clear that hospitality has seen the biggest increase.
Hospitality more so then. And just I'll quickly ask, actually, are there any new industries coming into this sector? So I know there's been talk about whether nursery workers could be included, and
If I can pass that down to Warwick, who's senior manager, to answer.
So we've seen increases across the board in all work permit routes. I think it was a couple of years ago, we introduced the ability for nurseries to recruit skilled workers from overseas to fill vacancies. And we have the healthcare sector as well, which I think are probably the two larger groups within the work permit policy that are growing. The care sector probably more so than any other sector.
so that there are nursery workers already included.
There are nursery workers we've issued work permits to, and we still get applications for workers to come in under that route.
Maybe I'm thinking about a possible
I
expansion of it. Or
believe
something,
there
yeah.
was, I saw some data recently from the Education Minister that there might be 15
Right,
in
okay.
the nursery facilities,
Yeah.
I believe.
Because there was, yeah, go on.
Can I just ask a question? You've just referred to the skilled visas and the work permits. Just for the benefit of the public, can you just explain the difference between the two?
So the temporary work permits are issued for either periods of 9 months or 12 months. It's down to the business that in hospitality, agriculture, construction, fishing, to determine at the outset whether they're going to recruit under the 9-month route or the 12-month route. And the skilled work permit route is can be applied for up to any period up to 3 years.
3 years.
There are certain criteria that must be met for a skilled work permit, including English language, and it is a route that does lead to settlement.
Thank you.
Thanks. So how effectively do you think the current work permit policy aligns with the realities of Jersey's labour market? So, you know, are there any sectors where it feels out of step with their needs?
I'll go to Warwick afterwards, but I sort of think that with Brexit and also COVID, I think the dynamics of our labour market changed anyway, because I think what we lost was the European community that were able to work and remain here. So I think that has had an impact, in my view, and I'll also, as I said, I ask Warwick to sort of give a view from the customs perspective. But I also think that there was changes as well as a result of COVID, where people wanted to leave the island to go back to be closer to their families, which is what happened during the previous government, and people were aided and assisted to actually go back to their own countries. And I think as a result of that, as well as probably some of the European countries actually now working within their own community. So you've got probably a lot of the Polish will have now work in Germany and they're still closer to their family. So I think that dynamic has had a change as well.
Yeah.
So I think from our perspective, that's why the work permits have probably rocketed to the level that they have. I mean, in relation to some of the industries, probably agriculture more so, you probably always did have work permit holders going back in history to when the French farm workers came to Jersey and then the Portuguese and then the Polish. And so I think that's a different industry, whereas with, I think probably more in the hospitality, you probably saw more Europeans that, of course, didn't have to have work permits, certainly once they enter, all of those countries entered the EU. And I don't know whether Warwick or Rhiannon can sort of...
Yeah,
Yes.
and also about how the people do fit into what industry needs
Yeah,
as well. now.
So the work permit policy, we recognise, doesn't cover every occupation or every job type that there is in the island. And we've crafted the work permit policy the best that we can with information that we've got. There is the ability for sectors to approach us and submit a business case as to why roles within their sectors should be included within the work permit policy. And from time to time, we get those business cases submitted and they're assessed on their merits. I think one thing that's really important about the work permit policy is there to protect our local workforce. So it's to give our young people the opportunities to move into some of these sectors. And we would encourage any business that is looking to enter into the work permit space to make sure that they've exhausted all local talent and recruitment and training before they look to the work permit policy to solve some of their resourcing issues.
Okay, great. So on a different matter now, one of the main areas for the review panel was about welfare of migrant workers. So how do you assess the balance between protecting worker welfare and meeting labour demands under this framework?
I think it's essential for the government of Jersey as a whole. So there's obviously 3 ministers here today, but the work permit policy comes under the remit really of all of the government, but particularly things like health and others. What we have done, and as I said, we've got a number of copies, etc., is that we felt that there was a need to be able to provide people coming to Jersey a full picture of what the salary is, but more important, and that's obviously not us that provides what the salary is going to be, but the actual extractions from that, the deductions from those salaries. So the sort of the tax and the social security, the long-term care, and in certain sectors, obviously, accommodation and food as well. So I think it's exceptionally important that when people are coming to Jersey, that they have a full picture of what they're going to receive at the end of it. Because I think a lot of people, it's of a reasonable cost for them to come here. Mm. And okay, some of the employers might pay those costs, but you've got the costs of flights, you've got the costs of a visa alongside the cost of a work permit. So I think all of that information, it's critical that it's available to those individuals really before they sign the contract to say that they're going to come here.
And we've got some more questions about the details, ask details about the information and accommodation and so on as well in the questions. So would you say that's one of the main things to focus on, the information that's available?
I think that's a critical part of it, because I think the thing is that if people don't have that information before they get here, they've arrived and their salary may not be up to what they can, because there'll be various communities that may be sending, looking after families at home that will want to be sending money home. But they need to also be able to have a life whilst they're here, and to be able to enjoy their stay whilst they are in Jersey as a worker, and to have all of those community benefits. So I think it is important from a welfare perspective that people are very clear as to what their expectations are and what they're actually going to get when they're here.
Okay, thank you. And
Sorry, can I just
yeah?
make a point as well around it being really important that people are aware of their rights and also aware that over here our government isn't corrupt. People can trust government and they can report things that are wrong. So that's a conversation that's ongoing that I have with my communications team as well, about ensuring that we build that trust, because people are coming from very different situations to the situation that we've got here. And it's really important that people know that they are safe to speak up.
Yeah.
Could I just add, though, on the other side of the coin, in regard to welfare, before people come, there's a permit process to go through. And if you want your dependents to come with you, you have to be able to show, or you should show, that you are earning enough money to support them. And I think that's quite important, that people realise the requirements of the permit, so they don't come here, find they have their dependents, and then become incredibly dependent on charity, hospitality, and handouts to feed their family.
Yeah, and
Because it does say in the permits, you know, you need to be able to support people you bring with you if you bring them with you.
And that was part of my next question, which is about a brief overview of the changes in the most recently published version of the work permit policy. And I've got some context here, which included that information that people know if they're bringing children, they have to be able to prove they've got sufficient income, so that it's all clear to people before they come. And also about what you're saying about the information about what it's like to live here. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that about the updates to the work permit policy?
Is there anything else?
So we've taken on board the comments that were in the work permit review in 2023, and we've incorporated many of those into the work permit policy that got published in December last year. Those include making clearer information or information clearer within the policy about what people are to expect when they come into the island, particularly, as the Minister's mentioned, around dependents, and make it clear that people understand that if they're coming under a skilled work permit, it's not a guarantee that they'll be able to bring their dependents with them. They've got to meet certain salary thresholds. It's more for us and welfare of children that we want to make sure that they're not disadvantaged by coming to the island. And the work permit policy does try to put measures in place to prevent exploitation, enhance the well-being of those people that are coming to the island. So we are looking for contracts of employment. We are looking for those employers to be complying with other legislation in the island, like control housing and work legislation, employment legislation, minimum wage and accommodation legislation that exists. So we're trying to do everything that we can from an immigration standpoint, and we are aware that people do have problems in the island, and we would encourage them to come forward and speak to us. And we will try and deal with any inquiries in a compassionate way that can be provided to us directly at Customs and Immigration, or they can go to the International Cultural Centre or provide information confidentially through our intelligence lines.
Okay, thank you. I think that's you now.
Yeah, thank you. You've already answered some of the context around information and support, and that's been really helpful. But what progress has been made in developing a kind of centralised single document for outlining the key information for potential work permit holders?
Do you want me to take this one? So we've got some documents here to pass to the panel. So these are two key documents. One is your rights as an employee working in Jersey, and the other is seasonal and temporary workers guide.
Right.
And are those available kind of through a portal? Are they on the website or?
So they're on the Moving to Jersey web pages
Okay.
on the government website. And when we send out work permits to employers, we also copy in the employee. We provide them with a notice that sets out immigration requirements and summarises some of the key points within the work permit policy. It provides them with links to other information and to other government agencies or charities that can provide assistance. And we also include a copy of that that top notice that you've got there, the temporary workers guidance, I think it's called, your rights as an employee is included as a PDF with that information.
Okay. That's really, really welcome to hear, because that was one of the key things that came out of the panel, and it was just, I think, a case of trying to catch up, wasn't it? So, I mean, that's a massive step forward, and, you know, comprehensive documents. Have you had any feedback from people who have been using these documents? Have you seen a dip in people coming, or have you seen an increase, or has it helped sort out difficulties when they come to you in immigration?
So that document's not produced by us, it's produced by another government department. It was updated earlier this year to make sure it reflected what was happening in the island in 2025, and I think feedback from some support groups was fed into the document, and various elements were included within that document to make it clear to those coming to work in the island.
Okay, and are these? Do you recommend that these documents are used by like community support groups and other agencies when disseminating information?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Let's talk about some other work that's ongoing at the moment
Please
as well
do.
within the International Cultural Centre space. I know there's some work going on at the moment around like a Welcome to Jersey event for people when they newly arrive in the island. So that's a work stream of the International Cultural Centre, so that not only do people get information prior to arriving, which is really essential because they need to they're making a life-changing decision, and they need the information before they make that life-changing decision. But also on arrival in the island, it's really important that people have that touch point as well, so that they are introduced to their rights and responsibilities in the island, but also those kind of connection points as well. So that's a piece of work now that the International Cultural Centre is taking on board. I don't have a date.
I was going to say.
I'm just trying to think if it's in the
Just
notes.
some
I'll
timescales,
shout
but
out,
yeah.
but that's definitely
That's a work
well
in progress.
underway.
And again, that's very welcome, isn't it? Because a lot of the things that we heard was about a lack of information and understanding of how things worked here. Has the government taken any steps to publish clear guidance on the types and nature of salary deductions applicable to work permit holders prior to the contract signing?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
So there's legislation around minimum wage. Within that documentation, it talks about the maximum deductions that can be made from someone's salary where accommodation and food are provided. So we provide that information within our work permit policy. It might even be in that notice as well. We try and make sure that people aren't disadvantaged when they come here, and they're not being not having bigger deductions than is absolutely necessary. The issue for us comes when people aren't paid minimum wage and they're paid at a higher rate. There is no legislation then to protect them around deductions that can be made for accommodation and food.
Okay.
We do put some guidance in the policy for employers that any deductions must be reasonable and proportionate. And I think in 2024, I think it was 27%, when you calculated the minimum wage, it was 27% of that individual salary could be deducted for for accommodation, and I think it was about 36 for accommodation and food. So we provided that as a bit of a guidance to employers.
Okay. So at the moment, then it is guidance as opposed to legislation. So are there any consequences for employers who over-deduct?
This is something that I'm keen to really work on. As was described, I think that there is what could be a loophole for employers who are paying above the minimum wage in relation to those deductions. I met with a union yesterday who was telling me that they thought that there may be that practice going on. I've asked them to give me some case studies so that then I can understand what that practice might look like and what we might be putting in, what we might be able to then put in place. with regard to, because of course that wouldn't only necessarily be happening with work permit holders, it could be happening to other minimum wage workers. So I'm keen to understand that. If the panel hears of any of that practice happening, I'd be keen to have that, but that's certainly something that I'm very aware of that could be a loophole. I've not seen evidence that suggest it's happening, but like I said, I had a conversation yesterday where it was suggested that potentially workers were being paid maybe above the minimum wage, but then deductions were taking them to below where the minimum wage threshold would be. If that was the case, my understanding is that within legislation, if there's a minimum wage breach, and this is where it comes down to real cross-government collaboration and the need for government to work together, because if there's a minimum wage breach, then my understanding is that's at the point in time when Revenue Jersey could then step in and then investigate that.
I mean,
breach.
it all sounds like a bit of a grey area, doesn't it, really, in terms of sort of enforcement and penalties and the like. But I guess if somebody complained that was happening, am I right in saying that immigration could revoke the permit?
Yes.
Yeah. So there is an enforcement ability in that if immigration are satisfied that proper processes and procedures and fairness are not being followed, you could revoke the permit and then allow that person to look for alternative employment that would meet.
Yeah, we would allow them to switch to other work permit employment.
Okay.
And we would probably look to restrict issuing work permits to that employer.
Person in the future.
So it would jeopardise their ability to function as a business if they're unable to rely on overseas resources.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Minister, as well. That's it's comforting to know that work is ongoing and being considered. Thank you.
I think on what both Lindsay and Warwick have said, I think it's important that people do actually report things, because I think this is sometimes the issue that we have, and this was the issue that we had when the review was done, is that people will say that there is an issue, but then it's quite difficult sometimes because somebody won't come and report it. And I think and what Lindsay said at the start is that people need to be confident that they can come to government to complain, whether that's to anybody. Well, there's 49 of us that sit in the Assembly, come and complain to somebody, but there's also States departments. And this is where I think we need to be encouraging people to go into the ICC in Union Street and complain. Because if they don't, we can't change things for the better.
Okay. Just on that last point, if somebody who'd been working for a couple of months for an employer realised that the deductions are bringing them far too low on what they should be earning, would they actually come and report it because they might be worried that they're going to lose their job and they're not allowed to get another one?
I think this is part of the myth that we need to try and dispel, that immigration aren't going to cancel your immigration permissions if you've been treated unfairly. There's also the option for that individual to go to JACS and seek some advice through them as well.
So even if they've only been on the island for a few months, they can go to JACS?
Yes. If it's a breach of employment legislation, I believe they can go to JACS.
But I would also reiterate again that this is the space that we've filled with the International Cultural Centre being a single point of contact for people to go and get help and advice, and signposting as well to the relevant departments. I think when we did the both Mary and I were on the panel, that was one thing that came up again and again, and you'll remember
it's a bit weird now, we're all reversed.
People feeling that their only avenue was either JACS and tribunal services or going to customs and immigration. Fairly shortly after we took office, because we wanted to respond to what we found, I had a senior officer which was working on some of the work permit cases, which has now led to inform some of the work that the International Cultural Centre are doing, and we now have case workers available in Union Street specifically to deal with these issues and help with signposting and help with the things that people need doing. But I'm certainly a lot more confident from the conversations that I've had, both with the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs and the Head of Service, that people who have come here, and even in those first few months, if they find themselves in a situation where their employer and their employment isn't quite what they were expecting and it's fallen short, then there is help available. And at the end of the day, we want people to have a good life on the island, and we need to attract and retain skilled workers and workers for our key industries.
Okay, so they shouldn't be scared of that, what
No,
they might have read about, you know, you've got to be with your employer for 6 months. They shouldn't be scared of that. They should know that if there's a problem, that they can go and ask for help. Yeah?
That's correct. And part of the thing that Lindsay and I did was the fact that we could understand that people may not wish to go to people what they perceive to be in authority, as in immigration or somewhere like the police. So that's why we said that there needed to be a single point of contact, because they may not be quite so scared to go there, because we really wanted people, we need people to highlight these things, otherwise we can't change it.
Okay.
Could I just add to that as well, just to confirm that the ICC and the Immigration Service work very closely together. So we have conversations at every level throughout the service, and there has been training delivered by the Immigration Service to the ICC staff. So whilst that is the single point of contact potentially, we feed into that very regularly and we work together.
Okay, good. So I just ask a few questions now about the healthcare when people are here in Jersey. So is there enough information about how the Jersey healthcare system operates for people coming here, including links to relevant sources, so that people are properly informed?
I think there's health, and I'm going to be quite honest here, because it is complicated here, isn't it, with the primary and secondary care. So, for example, I am responsible for the primary care piece, and after 6 months of being here, people will get their health card and be able to access GPs. The rules are slightly different for secondary care, where I think it's 6 months in the last 3 years before getting secondary care. So I would say that is an area where we could improve on information, because it is complex.
So they'd need to pay for, like, if they had to have an operation that wasn't an emergency one, they'd have to pay for it even after 6 months?
Not after the 6 months side, but obviously those would be questions better put to the Minister for Health rather than me. But what I will say is that because eligibility for those things is complex, I think as well there is an incumbence on employers that are bringing people over to ensure that people understand what they're coming to as well. I am very conscious from a social security perspective and benefits perspective. So if we talk about short-term incapacity allowance, for example, because our rules talk about a relevant quarter, and that goes 3 months back. One thing that I'm very conscious of is for returning people on the 9-month visa where they have to be away from the island for 3 months. If they are coming for several years at a time, that will mean that they have a gap in their contributions record. That is something that I'm working with officers to look for a solution for. But ultimately, I think I was quite alarmed when I realised that there are people coming year on year on year on year for 10, 15, 20 years on that 9-month visa. And that's the conversations I have with other ministers about, actually, is that right, and the right use of that visa, and how do we move people through employment routes and career pathways here so that they can live a happy and good life.
But to clarify as well, the element of their record will start from when they arrive, as opposed to they lose their record over time. Whereas before it was like every time they arrived, they had that gap. That gap doesn't apply, but we just need to make sure that some of the gaps are filled.
Yes, so there's improvement, but I did, when I read one of the original submissions to the review, which stated this thing about people coming back, doing their 9 months and then coming back again. So they had built up payments into the Social Security Fund And so it would seem fair that when they come
Yes.
back, that's taken account of at that
And
point.
that's a piece of work that I've asked officers to do this year.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the root cause of that issue is people coming for several years. So whilst I can do what I can do in social security to fill that gap, we also need to think about whether it's appropriate that somebody is coming on a 9-month work permit for several years at a time, and whether there might be other routes to career progression.
Yes, of course. Okay, so there's work ongoing with that. And I know there's plenty of information. Does that include information about costs of travel that people need to take account of?
To be honest, I think from the point of view of somebody signing a work permit, then a contract, it varies, doesn't it, between employers to who actually pays for the travel. Some employers will pay for the travel, others won't pay for the travel, or they pay for it and then ask for them to deduct it from their salaries.
Yeah.
But it's not something that I think it's sort of almost not in our gift to be able to.
What I was wondering is if somebody travels over and then that amount that is paid by the employer and then it's deducted from their salary, are they aware of how much this might be? So because they need to be able to plan for it, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, so what we've written into the work permit policy is some information about if the employer loans the employee money to cover the costs of flights and visas, that the repayments must be reasonable and proportionate. It must be in writing prior to that loan being given, and we would require evidence of what those deductions look like and how much has been loaned. And we've also put in there that the employer cannot recoup more than what they've lent. So we've made that quite clear in the work permit policy. We don't put information about the costs of getting to the island because they will vary depending on where in the world that they're coming from. But the Moving to Jersey web pages does provide information about ferry services and airlines or airports that service the island.
Okay. Is there any problems with delays in issuing documentation and problems for individuals around this matter, do you think?
When you talk about documentation, is that documentation that's provided to us by the employer and the customer, or
Whatever needs for them to be able to come here, is it something that comes up frequently that there's problems with delays?
So we try to process a work permit within 3 weeks, but with the volumes of work that we have, that we now push that 3-week window, and we are spending more time verifying documentation that's provided in support of applications. And we are coming across a lot more fraudulent documents that are provided to us about qualifications, experience, CVs, references, and that's taking us much more time than it has historically to run our checks. And it is a new trend that we're seeing that people are desperate to come to the island, and they are providing documentation that isn't accurate. We try and push some of that back to the employer and make sure that they're doing their due diligence when they are recruiting. But there are concerns that people are coming to the island without those checks being done. So we are conducting those checks on our behalf, particularly when people are coming to work in some of the sectors that look after vulnerable people of the community or are coming to educate our children.
Yeah, I think primarily we need to sort of really emphasise to the employers that when they interview, recruit people, that they need to be doing their due diligence on those people's qualifications, because really that is their responsibility. If you were employing locally, you would check somebody's credentials. That is part of their processes and should be part of their processes. The documentation really should be checked prior to it sort of ending with immigration and issuing of work permits, is my view.
Yeah, and even, I mean, ideally employers would be doing it well, but that must be quite a lot of extra work for customs and immigration.
it is generating a lot of extra work, and it's taking officers time away from doing other work streams, and we are seeing delays in processing work permits as a result, which has a knock-on effect to other work streams like the visas themselves.
Okay, all right. Last question from me at the moment is just about, is there a single pathway of support? I know that you've talked about the International Cultural Centre. So is it quite clear for people coming here on what they should do? I know there is help there, but is it clear that it's exactly where to go for different guidance and advice?
Obviously, the International Cultural Centre, as we have it now, was launched just in July, so it is new. We know that people are accessing the service. We've had 36 direct referrals in that time. Actually, this was in 3 months of operation, and 470 emails, so that we know that information's getting out there. Can we improve? We can always improve. As I said earlier, I've had conversations as well with my communications team about how we can do campaigns such as knowing your rights, and also knowing where to go when you need help. So we'll continue on that journey and that piece of work. But I'm pleased, and I know that Deputy Alves, who has political responsibility for the International Cultural Centre, is pleased with how things are going so far, but we'll continue improving.
Okay, thank you, I think.
Yes, indeed. Apologies again, everybody, for my lateness. I was at a planning meeting that one of the deliberations overran. Just on these policies here, I apologise if I'm asking the same question, but are these translated into other languages?
The employees' rights leaflet is translated into a number of different languages.
Excellent.
European as well as Filipino and Kenyan
Yeah.
are the main languages I think they're in. There's 6 or 7 different translations of that document.
That's excellent, thank you. My questions relate primarily to accommodation, and indeed, on the planning committee, very recently, we've had applications made about staff accommodation in the island. I won't tell you which sites because they're ongoing, and the rumour of another one. So my questions relate to that. The work permit policy states that the employer has to ensure that employees are adequately accommodating, meeting the minimum standards required, which supports their health and well-being. How is that minimum standard for accommodation defined, and where is it defined?
Well, Constable, as you'll know, all landlords, and including employers, as you've just stated, have a responsibility under the Health and Safety Rented Dwellings Law 2018, and that includes, where appropriate, applying for a licence for those units of accommodation. And that may then end up in an inspection by officers from my regulation director department. It's not a compulsory inspection, but they take it that they may well turn out and inspect properties which are licences applied for. But as I say at this start, landlords and employers are responsible under that 2018 law to make sure that the accommodation is fit for purpose.
Can those inspections be ad hoc and as it were, by surprise?
They can be, and we don't have any particular reason, but obviously if we receive complaints, and I would go back to what the Minister said previously, all complaints that come into the regulation department are anonymous, so tenants would not have to worry about the fact that they would be named, and I'm aware, as in many other circumstances, tenants are particularly concerned sometimes that they might complain, and that may have an effect on their status and consequently their employment. But it's nearly 18 months now since we started the licensing scheme for rented dwellings. We thought originally we might have 15,000 rented dwellings on the island. As of today, we're up to 18,600. So there are a considerable number of properties out there. And of course, this includes, doesn't include, 200 lodging houses. So there's lots of inspections to do. But like you say, we act on information, may act on any number of reasons to go in and inspect, and every licence that's applied for may well result in an inspection before the licence is given.
What would you consider to be reasonable steps taken by an employer to ensure that employees are suitably accommodated?
Well, there's rules and regulations around the levels and standards that are expected, and obviously some of those standards are mandatory statutory standards around fire protection. If you've got gas, for example, you need to make sure you've got the necessary monitors in place. But there's all sorts of other things, and of course we always say we want to help to educate landlords, and they're very much at liberty to phone the department and ask for an inspection before they apply or immediately after. And that the officers will go in and try and help where they can to identify issues which may not be immediately apparent to the landlord or the employer. But I think most people these days know where the standards are. And as I say, there are some statutory standards around electrical inspections, for example, and fire and health and safety in those areas. But we know, looking at our statistics, that there's some regular occurrences when it comes to complaints, and that's around damp and mould, electrical, and falling between levels, trip hazards or stairs.
Thank you very much. What steps have been taken to engage with employers to ensure that they are aware of their responsibilities regarding work permit employee accommodation?
Well, I don't know that there's any specific work in that direction, but what I would point to is, as I said, 18 months ago we started the rented dwelling licensing scheme, and there was a comprehensive promotion of that, and everybody, I hope, was absolutely aware that they were required to apply for a licence, but that's whether they charged rent or not, because as in some circumstances it may be the job goes, the accommodation comes with the job, and it's a deduction as such. It's not actually a sort of a payment from one person to another. But in all those circumstances, a licence is required. And as I say, we've had 18,600 applications, and I think there's been enough publicity around for people to know that they need to apply for these licences, and consequently that accommodation needs to be up to a certain standard.
Are there guidelines with regards to multiple occupancy?
That would come under the lodging houses, but I think there must be guidance under multiple occupancy. Certainly there will be allowances or restrictions for bathroom facilities, for cooking facilities, for this type of thing. And we're constantly in discussion with other sectors, not just agriculture, around the levels and standards of accommodation. And as you said on the planning committee, you will be aware. Certainly as the minister responsible for that, I am in continued discussion with the hospitality and agricultural sector around those standards. And the work permits are very much tied to that. And we want to make sure that people who come to the island and people who come to the island who live in accommodation which might not meet the minimum standards under normal circumstances under here, they may be here for a very specific 9-month period, and then they have to leave before they come back.
Would you be able to send us a copy of those guidelines around things like multiple occupancy?
Yes, I will find whatever I can for you, but as I say, yes, I will. I'll do that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you think that the employer is best suited to assess the condition of the accommodation? And a supplementary to that, do you think the Environment Department should have more responsibility to assess the standard of accommodation in contrast?
Well, the first thing I'd say is, as I've said, there's 18,500 units of accommodation out there, and it's clear that my small team in the regulation department couldn't inspect those on an annual basis. It would just be beyond us. But we do use, as I said, intelligence. We respond to complaints and other things, and I think they always get a feel for where they might need to look more closely. Obviously, we've got a lot of history in the department over where complaints have come from or areas where we have found deficiencies in the past, and officers will use that intelligence and their intelligence to focus. And your first question was, are employees qualified to assess?
Employers.
Employers, sorry, yes, of course. Well, I don't think there's a sort of a qualification to assess, but one would expect an employer to know what a basic level of accommodation should look like. And if they don't, there's a lot of places to go for that guidance. We've issued, in conjunction with the Landlords Association, we've done a lot of work around toolboxes and work and handouts that we can show, which tries to guide people through the levels and standards they're expected to meet in order to comply with the licence.
Do you think your officers have the shall I say the word, power to activate any issues? Do you think they need extra powers?
I think that's a very interesting question. I'm aware, for example, that while you are required to meet standards, I think I'm correct in saying that it's not an offence until you fail to comply with a notice. So, for example, you may have a property where the gas detector is not working properly. That in itself, in current legislation, to my best of my understanding, is not breaching. That's not breaching the law as such. What would have to happen is the officer would attend that property, would identify that the detector was deficient, issue a notice, and then failing to comply with that notice, we can then take it further. And I have to say that's probably an area of the law that needs to be looked at, so we can use some sort of looking back and prosecuting for that.
Yeah.
Because if people know they are breaking the law. There must be some sort of retrospection there to make the law have proper teeth.
Do you think there should be some consideration of shifting the oversight responsibilities from employers to an independent regulatory body?
All my staff are highly trained and highly qualified in their specialist areas, and they are civil servants, they are neutral, they work independently, almost. There will always be calls for independent bodies, but certainly in the case of the staff that I have working in the regulatory department, I am 100% confident that they meet those same standards. I accept that there will always be accusations that we need independence, but in many cases I would engage independents who would come in with exactly the same qualifications and the same standards as the staff that we have in the regulatory department.
And the collection of data, Minister, is records kept of offenders, records that obviously won't be publicly available, but your department has access to?
Well, officers in my department will know where complaints come in, and they will know where people are caught offending. We don't necessarily keep a lot of data on specific sectors of the rented dwelling licences because we're not required to do that. So, for example, I couldn't tell you that we have under that data set a list of every agricultural accommodation unit, for example.
Okay.
But maybe in the future that may be something that data that we may be able to obtain through a re-registration of those units, because they will need to be re-licensed on a reasonably regular basis.
Yes, indeed. Does the department work with any other agencies and stakeholders in dealing with unsatisfactory accommodation?
Absolutely, and I think it's incumbent upon our officers and officers from elsewhere that if they ever find themselves in a situation where they feel that another of the agencies might be required, they go back and report that. And I've got a list here of those that we do work with: Housing Advisory Service, Social Services, Adult Mental Health, Social Security, State of Jersey Police, Fire and Rescue Service, Ambulance, and all those housing providers. So there's a short list there, quite extensive though, great coverage of the sort of agencies that might be required. And if my officers go in to investigate a fall or a trip or something like that, or an electrical, but they see something else which alerts them to another potential challenge or problem, they will come back and they'll always talk in between departments about where other sorts of help might be needed. So, yes, I think is the straight, simple answer and quick answer.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, excellent. If the department's decision was at some stage in the future to go to a systematic checking of accommodation, would you need to increase your resource?
I think the answer would have to be yes. At the moment, we are a relatively small team with a huge amount of work to do.
Yeah.
And if a certain requirement came on us to inspect a particular sector, which ran into potentially several thousand units, it would be unrealistic to expect us to be able to do that in a short period of time.
Okay, and how regularly does the Environment Department review the accommodation for work permit holders? I think it's a similar question.
I would like to say it's a sort of always constant review, but how often we change it, I wouldn't, I couldn't tell you at this time.
Okay. Thank you. The review panel's report concluded that there was no systematic checking of accommodation occupied by work permit holders in Jersey. Have any measures been introduced since then to address the issue to improve oversight? In other words, are we working towards that?
Well, I think we are, and we'd like, I'm sure as the system evolves, we will find easier and quicker ways of identifying areas that need closer attention. But certainly in the last 12 months, my team have been very busy embedding this new licensing scheme. We've, as I say, done a lot of work with the Jersey Landlords Association to try and develop the toolbox and the guidance. But we're now spending a lot more time out there inspecting, and we're now using information that's coming into us and information that we gain when we do ad hoc visits to go out and look in certain areas. But certainly, you know, we're, as I said, it's 18,500 plus now units. It's a lot of work to get through.
Indeed it is. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, so just following on from the last question, you said your team is working away, but they're a small team and have a lot to do. So do you think it's acceptable that accommodation like a porter cabin in winter could be used for work permit holders? Do you think that there should be some sort of guidelines to say employers shouldn't be using such accommodation?
I would be careful about, in my own, using the word porter cabin, only in as much as the standard of porter cabin can vary greatly, and a porter cabin that was purchased 20 or 30 years ago would have had much lower levels of insulation, for example, which is a big issue with porter cabins.
Yeah.
And I think we all know that you can go out into the market now and buy a porter cabin which is, you know, palatial almost.
As good as a house.
Which will do everything and anything you want.
Yeah.
But I take the sentiment of the question on board. Porter cabins certainly filled a requirement for the agricultural industry, particularly back in the 80s and 90s, and there may be some hangover from that still around. But again, you know, as I say, if a porter cabin is used as a rented dwelling, it comes under a licence scheme. The person using it, the person owning it or renting it out must expect that they could at any moment be inspected, and if they're found to be lacking, if it doesn't come up to standards, there will be, you know, consequences.
Okay. So they should know there are consequences if the porter cabin is not adequate. Yeah.
Well, I think the term porter cabin itself is, you need to use it carefully because, as I said, certain porter cabins will be very good and certain porter cabins may not be quite so good, but then that could go for any unit of accommodation. Really, you may have a quite nice flat which could be in a terrible state and very nice.
Can I just ask a question? You said about a rented dwelling,
Yeah.
and I know this might be in the law, but if the permit worker isn't technically paying rent, is that accommodation there for a rented dwelling?
It is.
Okay, thank
Anything that would anything that would come under benefit in kind, for example, would be that. So, as I
it
said
would be
right at the beginning,
covered.
It doesn't necessarily need to involve the transaction with one person giving another person money. It may come with a job, the pay may be discounted or whatever, but if that person is living in that,
The law applies.
it's not necessarily a requirement for money to change hands, but to be defined as a rented dwelling.
Okay, thank you for making that clear. Okay.
So since April 2023, how many complaints have been submitted to the Housing and Nuisance Team at Environmental Health concerning accommodation occupied by work permit holders?
Well, unfortunately, that information is not something the department holds because it's not a consideration for those people to access the service. But what I can tell you, Chair, is that in very general terms, in 2024, the department received, the team received 375 complaints, and so far this year 290. And as I said to the constable earlier, we see a very little change in the amount of complaints we have, and they are very much concentrating on damp and mould, on electrical problems, on feeling cold in the unit of accommodation, and falling between heights. And those are the areas where we see the greatest number of complaints. But I don't have information specifically on
So this
any
is just for
particular sector.
any rented
Yeah,
dwellings?
that's the total for the. Yeah.
Would it be possible in future to to separate the work permit complaints?
I think, as I said previously, I think what we might have to do is to look at the re-registration and say to people when they are filling in for a re-registration, ask them very basic questions around what the accommodation is used for, or if it's used for a particular sector of industry.
Okay, and because I was going to ask about how many of the complaints resulted in formal investigations, were there any enforcement actions taken as a result? But we don't know which of these applies to work.
No, we don't.
permit
And what I can say is that it's only very rarely that we find that we get to an enforcement stage. As we go in, we educate, we talk to landlords, owners, and in most cases it's relatively straightforward to come to an accommodation as what it'd be very obvious if you haven't got your electrical certificate or your battery is not working on your detector. But some of the other instances where officers might make recommendations about increasing rail height or banister height or things like that, people are generally very good, and they go away and make the changes, and the officer can go back and inspect and say it's fine. Sometimes it may be necessary to issue a letter and a couple of letters, but it's very rare that we find ourselves in the final situation of having to enforce.
Okay, so the review panel found that when complaints about accommodation are made, it was through contact with cultural groups.
Drop-in sessions with recruitment companies, but also meeting with organisations such as the Jersey Farmers Union, Jersey Hospitality Association. But that link with the cultural groups very much will be with the International Cultural Centre. And they are also getting housing-related referrals as well. So going back, so out of the 36 referrals I referred to earlier, 11 of those were housing related. So we know at least that there's a broad number of concerns being made through the International Cultural Centre. And the referrals are being made by some cultural groups and also charitable organisations as well. And as well as states members as well. So that link, I think, can only get better with the cultural groups, with the work that the International Cultural Centre is continuing to do.
So you've mentioned some housing concerns. So is there enough collaborative and interagency working between customs and immigration, environmental health, social security, and even the International Cultural Centre? Is there enough going on between to try and see an oversight of work permit holders' welfare?
I think I'll interject here. You will be aware that building a safer community has had a huge impact, and let's make no bones about it, we've got a very proactive lead in relation to that particular piece of work. And there has been some concerns when both Lindsay and myself went to the homelessness forum, and a number of groups there were raising concerns. And what is now coming out of those concerns, alongside the fact that it's all agencies and all states departments, is that the individual who's running Building a Safer Community is going to start working with all of these groups, so that we've actually got, it is what it says on the tin, Building a Safer Community, and work permit holders are part of this community. And so we need to start actually bringing all of our resources into one place so that we are all working together and there are no gaps. So they've taken on that. It's a fairly recent starting point. So it's just really, I was quite pleased that this is, you know, something that we can bring to the table today, because it is a big thing that will make a big difference, I think.
Yeah, that's good, and if possible, we'll she be able to bring some sort of report on how this has worked, the effectiveness of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to add to what the Minister said, it's going to be known as a Migrant Safeguarding Board.
Yeah.
So, as the Minister said, that will sit under BASC, Building a Safer Community, which feels very much the right place for it. And that draws together all key stakeholders, so we have a more holistic and collaborative approach to looking at migrant wellbeing in the island.
Okay, that's
Can I
good.
ask a supplementary, Chair? We'd love to be, I went to a presentation the other day about the Safe Place initiative.
Yeah.
And I think that's excellent. We may in the parish halls need a bit more supplementary guidance and direct contact numbers. So we'd be very appreciative of you know, being able to call somebody directly if we did get somebody walking in.
Yeah.
Just a point.
Yeah, of course.
I think that's you, Helen.
Yeah, thank you. I think that I think that's a really significant move forward, isn't it, to actually establish a migrant safeguarding group board under BASC. And if you just look at kind of all the recommendations that you made in the work permit review, that really does support, doesn't it? Thank you. I've just got some brief questions around work permit policy and employers. You may have answered some of these already. It was just to know whether the work permit policy has been updated to clearly state whether employers are required to offer the minimum 40 hours a week to permit holders.
Did you want to take that or?
I can do.
Yeah.
Yes, so the work permit policy is set at 40 hours per week per employee to be able to qualify for a work permit. We expect all employers to pay their employees at that rate, regardless of whether they've got sufficient work for them during that week or not. We know it's an area of concern. We know that in some employers it's not their practice to pay their employees 40 hours a week. But what we want to see is that written into the contracts, and it gives the employees something to go back to Jacks with to help them as breach a contract.
Okay.
And where we uncover bad practices, we again allow that individual to switch to another employer and potentially prevent that employer from taking on additional work permit holders going forward.
Okay. So when you're issuing permits, do you check all the contracts?
All the contracts are checked.
Okay. So there's no excuse really. 40 hours is very clear.
Yeah.
In terms of the 0 hours contracts, is there any plans to revise the policy to address that gap and prevent potential misuse?
We don't allow 0 hour contracts on the work permits.
And employers, do you feel comfortable that employers are
Yes.
aware of that? Okay. What safeguarding measures are currently in place to ensure that work permit holders are not placed in precarious or unpredictable employment arrangements?
So the work permit policy goes some way to try and prevent exploitation of staff by making sure that they have contracts. They are going to be paid 40 hours a week, that the deductions are proportionate and right, that are going to be made for accommodation and food, etc.
And what's happening in terms of compliance with the work permit policy? Do any of your staff go out and actually check the working arrangements, the contracts, etc.?
Our compliance work's quite limited with the resources that we've got and the volumes of work that are coming through. Our compliance is primarily focused at the moment around documents that are provided in support of applications that might be being provided fraudulently.
Okay. So there's no kind of spot checking going on with employers?
No, we have been out to see employers, but it's not something that happens on a regular basis.
Okay. And
But
what
saying
would
that
you need to make that happen, Minister?
So I'll just, before I let the Minister come in, sorry, I'll just add to that we do react if we receive any kind of information or intelligence that bad practices are happening, we do take action then. So we do reactive compliance daily at the moment.
But no proactive.
From our perspective, I think the message for us would be that we have got limited resources, so therefore we do need people to make complaints to us if they are not receiving the level of hours that they are required to have. If you change the dynamic, that the expectation would be that those checks would be made, then that would make a totally different dynamic to the working force within customs and immigration, and that would mean potentially additional resources. And I think that's as simple as it is, because that's why we do need people to actually come to us to make those complaints, because at the situation we are at the moment, we haven't or won't have sufficient resources, the same as the environment, is that work can't happen unless you've got those extra resources to do that.
And I guess does that make it quite difficult, because employers equally will know that enforcement activity isn't taking place, and that they're not likely to be found out if they're offering less or offering something precarious.
This is something that goes across employment legislation, isn't it? Because it's not just work permit holders that would be in this situation, it would be other employees as well. So again, I'll reiterate, and sorry if I sound like a broken record, it is really important that we do ensure that people know their rights. We know that people know that they are entitled to join a trade union as well. But also that people know that they can get impartial advice from JACs as well, and that free advice, as well as being able to go to the International Cultural Centre for that correct signposting as well. At the end of the day, if somebody is not getting paid for the hours and their contractual obligations aren't being met by their employers, then that would be a breach of the employment legislation as well as a breach of the work permit policy.
Okay, thank you. What's been the effect of the change from the 12-month to 6-month restriction on work permit holders changing employers?
I think from a work permit holder point of view, it's obviously a welcome addition to the work permit policy or amendment to the work permit policy. I think the thing to say is we treat cases on a case-by-case basis. We're very mindful that there is a person at the heart of everything in immigration. And as Warwick said earlier, we treat everybody with compassion. So I think having that flex in the work permit policy or the amendment to go from 12 months to 6 months is seen as a good thing. What we have built in as well is that there is also an exception to that. We don't want people to have to wait 6 months. They can always come to us. And as I've said, the team are excellent at dealing with the people who walk in and come to us, and we will continue to do that.
Okay, thank you. Can you advise us whether there's been any assessment of the financial and operational impact of the 9-month work permit rule with the requirement for the 3 months absence before employees can come back? I'm not sure whether this should be a question for the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, really.
I think it probably should, actually, because I think...
What I can say in the agricultural industry, obviously that was quite challenging to start with. And certain sectors, I mean dairy farming, for example, where you need staff all the year round.
Yep.
And I think what happened after a relatively short period of time is employees tried to work out almost a rota for 3 or 4 years ahead, so they could make sure they had staff coming in and out, but they always had a static level of staff. So from an economic point of view, I suppose that was quite challenging to start with. But once you had the system primed and you were using it, and people understood and your staff were happy to work under those restrictions, I think it worked okay.
I think I would back up what you've just said, because I've actually spoken to people in different industries, and some in relation to the 9-month work permit are very happy with them because they, like agriculture, have put their spreadsheets in place, and basically they keep rotating their staff. And if you look at things as a classic, is your cruise ships. They have people on contracts for 6 months, 9 months and whatever, and their turnover of staff, people go back for 6 months, go back home, spend time with their families, and then they come back and they keep rotating. And it works well, but it takes some managing. That's the thing. But I think the thing is, we'll reiterate this again, the sort of 9-month, 12-month work permits was for temporary employment and it's what it says on the tin, it's a temporary sort of solution. And maybe that there's a piece of work that needs to be done by a government at some stage to decide actually what is our population and what we're going to do. Are we going to continue in this direction of having people on work permits, or are we actually going to look at what we actually need and maybe change it? But that's something for a different day. But I think
It's about population policy, which is a different discussion
Yes,
entirely.
that's the
Short term is subjective, isn't it?
Yes.
Your short term might be different to mine, and
Yes.
I'm sure employers would see this differently as well.
I think it's important to point out that the employer has a choice to employ on the 9-month, 3-month absence or on the 12-month route, rotating up to a maximum of 3 years. There is an expectation on employers to try and upskill their staff if they get a good employee and move them onto the skill route. And it's set at 3 years maximum for most of those sectors to give those employers the opportunity to develop their staff and move them on. So the cost factors are actually reduced.
How much evidence have we got that that policy's working?
So we've got about, I think the split is about 80% on temporary 9-month and 20% on the 12-month rotating.
And what evidence have we got when we put on the 12-month rotating that employers have actually upskilled so that they're going from the 12-month onto the skilled visa?
We haven't got that data to hand.
Okay. Because that would be an interesting to understand whether the policy worked, because the policy was deliberately put in place to allow longer for training and development so that you'd come off the work temporary permit completely and go on to the skilled. And it would be really good to understand which industries have succeeded in doing that and how they've done it,
We are seeing people move from the temporary routes onto the skilled,
which is great.
but we just don't have the statistics on it.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting to understand. There's some case studies around that.
We will go away and look at those statistics and we can always report back to you.
Yeah, that would be
This,
very
this is a conversation also that we've had recently, isn't
Yeah.
it, around ensuring as well that employers and employees know those options and those career options as well. I saw something, on social media where there was a case being talked about, and I was thinking to myself, why in that particular case were they not thinking about moving on to a skilled visa? So I think again, employers need to ensure that they are fully informed about the options available to them and also inform their employees about those options as well.
Okay, thank you.
And some of those temporary roles don't qualify for
skilled,
skilled work permits because of how they're graded.
Yeah, understand that. Can you please advise us of what steps have been taken to provide additional support to small employers to help them ensure compliance with the work permit policy?
I think we treat all employers in the same way when it comes to the work permit policy. We've not had any approaches from small businesses looking for our support in making applications. We are aware that some small businesses that aren't covered by our temporary routes or the skilled routes do struggle to recruit, but we do ask for sector-based business cases to be put on. What we don't want to do is provide an advantage to one employer over another by granting them the ability to recruit work permit holders without understanding what the sector is and what the need of the sector.
Okay, thank you. And just a very quick, I think the Minister for Social Security alluded to it. What steps have been taken to work with industry and trade unions to make sure that work permit holders have meaningful access to union representation and support?
So that's a conversation that I have with trade unions. I met with one trade union yesterday. I intend to meet with the other trade unions in the coming weeks. And that is one of the topics of discussion that I have with the trade unions about ensuring that they are out there and that people know that they can join. So I know that that's obviously the role for the trade union to go out there and speak within different sectors and obviously recruit within those sectors as well. But again, the people working in those sectors need to know that that is their right to be able to join a trade union and have that kind of representation as well. So that is part of that ongoing piece of work that I'm trying to work with my communications team so that we're myth busting a lot of the time.
Okay.
I've done it with, I tried to do it with income support and now with
Now with
employment rights as well.
Okay, thank you very much.
We're going to move on to questions about modern slavery and exploitation, if I may. Has the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs initiated a formal consultation on the introduction of modern slavery legislation for Jersey as recommended by the review panel?
Right. Yes. As no doubt people will know that I am keen to get some form of legislation. However, the operation of the UK's Modern Day Slavery Act relies on systems we don't have. So you've got your gangmasters, your Labour Abuse Authority and Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner. I mean, obviously we are a very small community. Legislation is time consuming, and the reality is that we've had to balance this against other priorities, such as current ongoing work that you'll all be aware of. It is important to stress that anyone where conditions amounting to modern day slavery, there are alternatives that we could actually put forward in relation to existing laws, potentially, relating to the unlawful detention of a person or their treatment under employment law, and any reports of that nature would be thoroughly investigated. This isn't the only thing that we can do. Law isn't the only thing. We've obviously, the Immigration Department have changed, it's a moving beast in relation to the fact of changing the policies and making it, the permits, giving people better support, and now with the resources in relation to the International Cultural Centre. What I have been doing, and I've had discussions about people who've worked with modern day slavery in the UK, and some of that is that they don't perceive that works that well anyway, and there isn't that many prosecutions in relation to it. So I've made contact with somebody from the UK who has been providing me some other options which I need to start looking at, and I haven't as yet done so, and we'll share those obviously with Customs and Immigration, because I think there's a lot of things that we can be doing by policies that until the legislation, we are able to put the legislation in place, would be valuable. The building the safer community, and that's why I've got this big circle here to remind myself this morning about this, because there is a lot of things that we can do. And I've now forgotten what I was actually going to say, but one of my team is or has been looking at various things in relation to this, but we haven't got the policy time to be able to look into it deeper, and certainly haven't got the ability in relation to law drafting time. So I think the thing is that there's still work that I would want to do, because I do feel like we need something. It's like with everything, you do need sometimes to have the specific legislation, but you need to have the specific legislation that sits with your proper community. I don't know if Customs and Immigration have got anything that they wanted to add to that in relation to what I've just said, really.
I think since the review was done in 2023, we've developed our knowledge and experience in modern slavery and exploitation to try and get a better understanding of what those terms actually mean, and how the UK are impacted by both those areas. So we've attended a number of conferences in the UK on modern slavery, and we've sent 6 officers over to the UK to work with immigration enforcement on enforcement visits, attending properties and businesses where there are concerns about modern slavery and exploitation of staff, and they've found that really, really valuable. I think the interesting thing about UK legislation on modern slavery is that many of the cases that are brought before the courts in the UK are brought against immigration legislation and not modern slavery legislation. I think part of the reason for that is there's a very limited case law around modern slavery, and therefore there is immigration legislation is the more appropriate route to take.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for being so honest about that, Minister. But just to help the panel, do you think it's the timeline for this legislation would be prior to the election or post?
without a doubt it'll be post, because certainly from a policy time, there are other policies, now that the police complaint has been lodged, once that has gone through the Assembly, it'll then be, the policy time will be put to hate crime. And of course, hate crime is across the whole of the community as well.
Yep.
I think Warwick makes a good point in relation to a lot of the legislation that's been brought forward in the UK is immigration. And it is as a result of my experience having had a secondment overseas, where I think I've become interested in modern day slavery, but for the same point as what the immigration staff have seen. So this won't come, but we need to try and work out how and what kind of legislation we're going to be able to have for Jersey that doesn't have all of the administrative burdens that the UK does, because it's just not feasible with the population we have.
As has been alluded to, we have employment law. You can't unlawfully detain somebody. And there is legislation in place which could help us out here. I think we all, as ministers, share limited resources, especially for legislative work, and where you have laws that can help you, putting resources into producing a new law, which may not be all that required, I don't know. When you've got so much other work to do, it's always challenging to reprioritise.
It might be actually worth, and you've just given me a thought process in here, it may be worth looking at whether there's anything that is in a modern day slavery type of legislation, which you could potentially put some of those things into an immigration piece of legislation. I don't know, but it needs to be researched a little bit more, to be quite honest.
But it's good to hear from the panel's point of view that you're
Never off my radar.
engaging with stakeholders anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We've actually just got time to ask number 30.
Number 30, okay, I will do that, yes, thank you.
We're nearly finished.
My age.
Oh, we got 4 minutes and counting. Okay, number 30 is to do with disputes and grievances. What measures has the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs considered or implemented to allow work permit holders a temporary stay while pursuing a workplace dispute or grievance? And how does this align with the principles of fairness and access to justice?
Warwick, have we...
We don't necessarily hold records on the number of people that have raised a grievance. We tend to, it's something that we're trying to work with on our system and develop that so that we can start collating some of this information. But we do try and deal with people in a pragmatic way, in a compassionate way. So when they do come in and they do have issues, we deal with them in the appropriate manner. We'll allow them to, depending on the nature of their grievance, we'll allow them to remain in the island while that is being worked through. We might allow them to switch into other work permit employment as a result of that. And in some cases, depending on the circumstances, we may request that individual to leave.
Oh, really? Okay, no, that's good.
Okay, so I'll just finish with this concluding question. So to conclude the hearing, please can we ask each of the ministers if there are any additional points or updates not covered in previous questions that you wish to bring to the panel's attention?
They've gone very blank, Chair.
We're all thinking.
I think
it's always difficult to strike a balance between the demands of industry and trying to make sure that people are properly housed and their permits are fair to them as well as to the employer. And I think that's always going to be an ongoing challenge. And as I said, I've got challenges in my own sector about how long we should allow people to stay in levels of accommodation which might not necessarily meet the minimum standards, and the Constable's well aware of that, sitting on the planning committee. So that's an ongoing challenge. We set minimum standards, but there will always be circumstances where people want to come to the island, earn as much money as they can in a short period of time, send it all home, and then return themselves, and their level of accommodation is of less interest to them than others. But that doesn't necessarily mean we should be giving carte blanche to a particular sector of the economy to house people in what we might describe as substandard accommodation.
Absolutely. Yep, very correct.
yeah.
Okay.
No, I think just to reiterate the point that this has to be a collaborative approach in order to protect vulnerable people. We all need to work together, and we certainly as a government have a commitment to working collaboratively across ministers and across departments as well. And it's something that we as a community need to really be clear on, to make sure that people do feel empowered to speak up if they are being exploited, if they're being improperly treated, because we are the type of community where that is not acceptable.
I couldn't have put it better myself.
Okay, so that's,
I think you know it's good that we've had this hearing, because I think the thing is that it is a bit, as Deputy Miles said, it's a bit of a change of a dynamic. But I think the thing is that all of us want the same thing, and feel that we need to keep working towards getting. It's never going to be perfect, because life isn't perfect, but I genuinely believe that we're all working in the same direction to make things as good as they possibly can be, and just give the people that do come here on work permits the confidence to walk into Union Street, immigration, police station, to actually report things, because for me, that is the critical thing. That when somebody says to me that they feel that there's elements that are happening, I want them to be telling me that, because if they don't tell me that, I can't do anything. And I think all of us in this room have the same wish, that if somebody is really not being treated properly, we want to be able to resolve that. And if they don't tell us, then we can't do that.
Can I say something briefly? Recent statistics from Jersey came forward very, very recently to say that since 2019, between that time and 24, rest of world applications went up by 172%, from 1,800 to over 5,000. So this is a significant body of our population. So it's great to know that we're all thinking in the same direction.
okay. All right, then. Thank you very much, everyone.